Hey everyone, how's it going? Forrest here, again with another installment of my complete analysis of all of J.S. Bach's chorale harmonizations. Today we're looking at Wie schön leuchtet der Morgenstern, which translates to How Beautifully Shines the Morning Star. We've actually looked at this melody once before. It's actually the first melody in the BWV collection, and I don't remember that harmonization too well, so hopefully there's some overlap between this analysis and the analysis I did a couple weeks ago. But that being said, we should pretty much just hop right into the analysis. More or less everything's functioning the way that we expect it to. There are a couple interesting harmonic tidbits that we see from time to time, but we'll talk about them when we get there. 2 sharps in the key signature. We start on D major, we end on D major. I reckon we are in the key of D major. We then have C sharp, E, A, and A. That's an A major triad in first inversion, which is 5-6. And before we go any further, let's take into account the fact that we end on what I hear as a perfect authentic cadence in the key of A major. So we're looking for a modulation point. I don't think it's too far into the future that we're getting it because we have G sharp here. We then have D, D, A, and F sharp. That's our tonic triad again in first root position. We have some passing tones going on. We have C sharp, E, A, and E, which is kind of like a passing 5-6 again, so I'll mark that. And then we have B, F sharp, B, and D. That's a D minor triad, which is 6. However, I think another way that you might be able to analyze this, depending on how you look at it, is if this G sharp is at all on your radar, that would make this a G sharp diminished chord, which is 7 of 5, because G sharp's the leading tone to A, and we're going to the key of A, so that's kind of interesting. But I think this is also our modulation point where we modulate to the key of A major, and I literally just wrote out the letter B there as opposed to writing a Roman numeral, which is 2, lowercase 2 in root position. We then have F sharp, A, C sharp, and A with a passing tone in the bass. That is F sharp over, no, that's just F sharp and minor in root position, which is a 6 chord. Kind of an unusual progression. This is a transitive progression because 6 usually goes to 2, but I don't see why they can't go the opposite direction as well. We then have B minor 7 over D. That's D, A, F sharp, and B, which is a 2-6-5 chord. Bach loves his 2-6-5 chords, and it gets turned into root position on this beat. So technically it's 7 and 5 because there's no longer a third in that chord if we take it out of the bass. We then have E, G sharp, E, and B. That's our root position E major triad. And then we cadence on A major, which is our tonic. And then we go ahead and then we have another perfect authentic cadence in the key of A major. However, similarly to the first phrase, I think we go back to the key of D major first before we get the key of A major, and I think it happens in and around the same metric position, around beat 3 of the phrase, or beat 4 of the phrase, beat 3 of the first complete measure. So we'll go ahead and call this A major triad 5, now in the key of D, and that goes where we expect, D major, D, D, F sharp, and A, which is our tonic triad now. We then have G natural. This is one of the big proponents for the fact that we go back to D, because this is, if this was a G major triad, that really wouldn't have a place in the key of A major, unless you were thinking like a flat 7 chord, which would be very modal for Bach's time. But yeah, this would be a root position G major triad, which is 4 in the key of D. We then have F sharp, E, G, and C sharp, but I think it's this E that's the culprit here. It's actually E, E, G sharp, or sorry, G natural and C sharp, which is C sharp diminished over E. That's 7-6, so 4 going to 7, we would expect that to go to 1. F sharp, A, and D. That's our tonic triad, D major in root position. And then we get this G sharp here. The G sharp and the B are both kind of hinting at the idea of 7 in the key of A major. So I think this is our modulation point, and we can call D now 4 in the key of A major. And this is now on the offbeat, 7-7, fully diminished in root position. G sharp, B natural, F sharp, and D. And apologies, it's not fully diminished, it's half diminished. G sharp to F sharp is a minor 7th, not a diminished 7th. This would have to be F natural. And then we have A, C sharp, E, and C sharp, which is our root position tonic triad, A major. All right, now we're getting ready for our cadence. We have D, F sharp, A, and B, which is our B minor 7 over D, which is another 2-6-5 chord. And then we have E, E, G sharp, and C. However, I think this C is an accent and non-chord tone. And if that's the case, we get the resolution of the chord on the offbeat, which would mean that this is now 5-7, depending on how you look at it. It could just be 5 if you treat this D not as heftily as you treat this C sharp. But then, of course, we cadence on 1, A major being our tonic. And as you would expect, the last chord in the phrase is a D major, and it's a perfect authentic cadence in the key of D major. So similarly to how the first phrase ending aligns with the beginning of the next phrase in the key of D major, it does the same thing here. So we'll call this A5, and then we go to D major, D, A, D, and F sharp, and same way that it goes to a 4 chord after the tonic here, it does the same thing. G, G, D, and B, which is a root position G major triad. It's a 4 chord. Then we have F sharp, A, D, and A. That is a tonic triad in first inversion, so D over F sharp. We then have E, B, D, and G. And depending on how you look at this, you might look at this and call this a 2 chord, or even more specifically a 2-7 chord, but I think this B and this D, they're both accented non-chord tones. We see this pattern of 2 tonic triads being linked together, and I think it makes more sense to do so via a diminished chord, so C sharp, G, and E, which would be a C sharp diminished chord. 2 going to 7 is not as strong of a progression as 4 going to 7, which we tend to see over a longer metric period of time. But I think another valid analysis, and this goes against what I've said in my last videos, but another valid analysis is saying that this is a 2 chord that then goes to a brief passing 7 that then goes to a 1 chord. But it's much more common to see a 1 go to a 7, then back to a 1, then a 1 going a 2, going to a 7, going back to 1. But regardless, we go to a D major triad in root position. We then have A, D, and E. We know this D is an accented non-chord tone, or a 4-3 suspension, depending on how you look at it. We know this is just an A major triad with a delayed 7th on beat 2. The resolution happens on beat 2 as well, or beat 2 and is when the 7th happens. And then we cadence on D major, which is our tonic. Okay, moving ahead, we have 2 short phrases. We've seen this in a couple of chorales now, where we have 1 measure long phrases, and it's usually very short, just like half notes like this. We have an imperfect authentic cadence here in the key of D major, C sharp, A, E, and A, which is A major over C sharp, that's 5-6, and then it goes to D major in root position. But because the F sharp's in the melody, we have an imperfect authentic cadence. We have a bit of a stronger imperfect authentic cadence next because of the fact that we have a root position 5 chord, A, C sharp, E, and A, going to a root position tonic triad here. But still the F sharp is in the melody, so we don't, it's still imperfect authentic. Then we have the longest phrase in the entirety of the chorale next. It's a perfect authentic cadence in the key of D, so we haven't modulated at all, but we have some harmonic interest happening in and around bar 3, so we'll get to that when we get to it. But next we have D, A, D, and F sharp. That's just a root position tonic triad, no need to reanalyze. Passing tone in the bass, F sharp, A, D, and F sharp. That is a first inversion D major chord. Only need to change the figured bass for that one. Passing tone in the bass as well. Then we have A, C sharp, and E. That's a root position A major chord, which is 5. Neighbor tone in the bass. We get another 5 chord on the next strong beat, A, C sharp, and E, with a passing 7th in the bass. We then get F sharp, A, D, and F sharp, which is a D major triad in first inversion. So 1-6, neighbor tone in the bass, and we get the same chord again, so no need to reanalyze. However, we get a skip down to D here on 2 and, which would be the equivalent of taking the chord and putting it in root position, so I'll go ahead and mark the root position figured bass there. We then get A, C sharp, and E, which is an A major triad in root position. That's a 5 chord. bass leaps up an octave, and then we get some interesting harmony. We get G natural, A, D sharp, and F sharp. I think this G natural is a non-chord tone, and really what we're looking at here is this F sharp right here. So F sharp, A, D sharp, and F sharp. And if you look at that, that would be D sharp diminished over F sharp, which would imply 7/6 of 2, because D sharp is the leading tone to E, and E is our supertonic or our 2. And then we get something really interesting that happens on this beat, and we've seen this in a couple of chorales before. So on this beat, we get E, B, E, and G, which is our 2 chord. That's where it goes to. But we often find that with 2 chords, in the voice that links the 6th scale degree, so in this case B, to the tonic, we often get a leading tone. And in this case, it's a passing tone, but just like how we saw it here, where this 7/6 chord, I opted to call it a 7/6 chord instead of a 2/7. Here the inverse is happening. Here we could also call this 7/6 because the chords are so similar to one another. So here we have the 2 being tonicized, but we also have that 6th linking to 1. So it kind of conflicts with the argument that I've made that when we see that movement between 6 and 1, it's usually via a leading tone chord rather than a supertonic chord. But I think the difference between this chord and this chord is in the way the bass is moving. So the bass resolves the way that we expect it to, but we get some hints going on as well towards the fact that there is a little bit of leading tone in there as well. So I'll mark that there. It's kind of a complement to this chord over here. But then we get B, D, D, and F sharp. That is a B minor triad in root position, so that's 6. We then have some passing tones in the alto and the bass. We then have G, D, B, and E. That is this is the second time we've seen 2 go to 6 go to 2 as we're getting ready for the cadence. We have E minor 7 over G, which is 2, 6, 5. It's actually very similar to this cadence we have here, 2, 6, 2, 6, 5, 5, 1, which is actually pretty much the exact cadence we have harmonically speaking. This cadence is much plainer in terms of the texture. This one's much more contrapuntally rich. But we have A, C sharp, and E, with a passing 7th in the tenor. So we have our 5 chord here, A major, and then we cadence on 1, which is D major. Okay, moving on, we have a perfect authentic cadence in the key of D, as we would expect, so no more modulation. We have something interesting going on here. We have an ascending B melodic minor scale fragment, but we don't modulate. I think this is really just a byproduct of bringing our attention to B minor, but you're going to find here that we don't actually get B minor. We get the makings of it, but we get a different bass, which puts it into a very different perspective. So we have B, F sharp, and D. That's a root position B minor triad. So there's our B minor there. Passing G sharp, so melodic raised 6th. We then have F sharp, F sharp, and C sharp. We know that's an F sharp triad with a passing 7th in the alto, and that is 5 of 6. But interestingly enough, we go from 5 of 6 to G major, G, B, D, and B, which is a root position G major triad. That's a 4 chord. And just to put it into perspective, this isn't implying that a modulation has happened, but this is the equivalent in the key of B minor of going from 5 to 6. So it's a pretty textbook deceptive progression. Sorry, I lost the words. But yeah, 5 of 6 going to 4 is a deceptive progression. We have a passing tone in the alto as well. So definitely an interesting harmony going on here. A, C sharp, F sharp, and A. That's an F sharp minor triad in first inversion. So another take on the deceptive progression. We would expect 4 to go to 5, and it does go to 5 in the bass, but the chord atop it spells out 3, which is similar to 5 because they both have A and C sharp, but the difference is E versus F sharp, and here we get the F sharp. So he's prolonging the progression to make it feel cadential later, and that's what this 3/6 does. We then have B, D, F sharp, and G. That is a B minor 7 chord. Oh no, sorry, that's a G major 7 chord over B, so that's 4, 6, 5. We have some non-chord tones going on in the lower three voices. We have C sharp, E, E, and G. So 4 is going to 7 in root position. So 4 going to 7, that's exactly where we expect it to go to. Then we have D, A, E, and F sharp. So D, A, D, and F sharp is our tonic triad in root position. This E is an accented non-chord tone. And then we're in the home stretch. We're ready for our final cadence. We have G, B, D, and E, another E minor 7 chord, or another 2-6-5 chord. Have we seen an E minor 7 chord yet? We have. We've seen one here. So this is another one. A little passing tone action going on in the alto. And then we have A, C sharp, and E with a passing 7th in the tenor. That's A major, which is our 5 chord. And of course we cadence on D major at the end for a perfect authentic cadence. All in all, a very quaint chorale. All the harmony pretty much functions the way we would expect it to. We get some interesting deceptive progressions via secondary dominance going on in the home stretch. This really interesting progression going on here where we have 7 of 6 going to 2, and then we have 2 with that pesky leading tone that makes me usually analyze the chord as a 7 chord. But here we have no choice but to call it a 2 because we're not tonicizing the 7. Typically we can't tonicize a 7 chord because diminished chords don't have tonic function. You can't really give a diminished chord a tonic function because it doesn't have a perfect fifth, so it doesn't have that stability that we're looking for in a chord. But that being said, I think I'll leave you all on that note. Thank you so much for watching the video. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. I hope you've been enjoying the analyses. I know I've been enjoying them, and I look forward to tomorrow's analysis as well. I hope you take care.